Hello. Good morning, noon, or evening to everybody out in podcast land. This is, sorry, ChatRFH, a very special 100th episode of Radio Free Humanity, the Marxist-Humanist podcast. This podcast is produced by Marxist-Humanist Initiative, but the views expressed by the hosts are solely their views. We're very, very happy to have reached 100 podcasts. We started about 4 years ago and have kept up a regular schedule. And here we are at number 100. You will, if you've ever heard it, be familiar with the co-hosts. Brendan Cooney, want to say hi, Brendan?
Hey, hello, everybody.
And Andrew Kleiman.
And I'm Andrew Kleiman. Yeah, hi, everybody out there in Radio Land and TV Land, or whatever it is.
Okay. I just want to speak for them for 1 minute to tell you that they're very happy to be able to hear from you all out there. The major drawback of the standard podcast format is the lack of ability to engage with the listeners. And some of you write in, but not very many. So this special chat RFH is one thing we're doing to try to overcome that problem. If it goes well, we'll consider doing similar chat episodes in the future. Why is it so important to MHI that we have your feedback and not only your opinion of what we said, but your contribution to furthering the dialogue? It's because we are based on the political and philosophic importance of dialogue as a way to work out ideas, to test what's true and what's false. So it's essential to us that we have such a dialogue, and we encourage you all to send in your questions and comments. They don't have to be questions. And we will read out as many as we can, and the hosts will answer as many as they can. Brendan, you wanted to say something next?
Yeah, so just wanted to talk a little bit about our chat procedures. Andrew and I are going to discuss, this is sort of an open discussion. We can talk about past things that we've talked about on the podcast or new topics if people have questions on new topics. So you're welcome to leave a comment or a question, and the way to do that is through the Zoom chat. I think Andrew's going to discuss the functions of that.
Yeah, that's what I'll do. Yeah.
Yeah. So, anything's open. People want to talk about current events like the state of the Trump prosecutions, the upcoming U.S. presidential election. If people want to talk about the weather, as in like climate change, these are like, things that are on my mind right now, but there are a lot of other things we could be talking about too. Andrew, do you want to describe to listeners how to interact with us through the chat function?
Yeah, but before I do that, as Brendan said, the floor is open for whatever questions or comments on whatever topic you want to chat about. But he mentioned a couple of things that he's interested in talking about. One of the things that I'd like to talk about is starting in 2 weeks, I'm going to be leading a 2-part class series via Zoom on Henrik Grossman's crisis model and crisis theory, his breakdown theory. And so, I'd be very interested in talking about that because that's what I'm working on at the moment. And the other thing, I'm very concerned about right now is the issue with the Trump prosecutions. Everybody, right, middle, left, everybody seems to have accepted that the legal processes are not going to defeat Trump, much less Trumpism. And nothing's going to stop him from being able to run for president, from undoing a conviction if he's elected. And then they say, so what we need to do, the real solution to this is to defeat him at the ballot box. And I'm like, hello, weren't you there in 2020? The definition of insanity is doing something exactly the same way you did it before when it didn't work. So those are a couple of things that I'd be interested in talking about, but again, the floor is open. Okay, so just a couple of issues regarding the chat. If you're not familiar with how to use it, it depends on your operating system and so forth, but there should be a series of icons at the bottom of your Skype screen, and maybe about the fourth icon from the left says chat. So to open your chat, just click on that icon, and a window should appear to the right of the Skype screen. If you see some message covering the top of that chat window, look for where it says got it or something and just click, and you'll see the whole thing. And there's a lot of stuff, maybe it depends on what you're seeing, but there'll be a bunch of stuff at the top. Messages, comments, questions are going to be there in the middle, and way down at the bottom. Okay, if you look, it says who can see your messages, recording on whatever, and then you see where it says to, and you can send a message to MHI host. If you see where it says, pretty much right down there at the bottom where it says MHI host, that's who you'll be sending your messages to. And right under that, you write your message right over where it begins message, ChatRFH, and so forth. And then you can either just hit enter on your keyboard, or the little send arrow, which I see at least on the very bottom right. All of the messages, your comments and questions are being moderated. So you're going to submit your messages to the MHI host. He's going to select some and post them in the chat. And we'll be reading them out, and then we'll discuss them. And the MHI host is also going to be posting in the chat window some of the comments and questions that were submitted ahead of time to the email account for this episode, the ChatRFH email. And when selecting which of the submitted messages to discuss, we're taking into consideration whether they're appropriate, not trolling or whatever. The length, please don't make them too long. The topic, we hope to have a variety of topics. And depending on, how this goes, we might just not have time for everything. So the chat is being moderated. We're going to try to get a variety. If what you're saying is relevant and appropriate, you probably stand a good chance of getting through.
Okay, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Ann Jaclard. I'm organizational secretary of Marxist-Humanist Initiative. I hold it all together when I can. So we're going to start this discussion with reading out some greetings that we got from our special guests at prior episodes of Radio Free Humanity. The first one I have is from Rohini Hensman, who's been on a couple of times, and she writes, "Greetings and congratulations to Radio Free Humanity on the occasion of its 100th episode. In the approximately 4 years of its lifetime, it has covered both contemporary news and issues of vital importance to Marxist humanists with critical rigor, as well as nuance and subtlety. An indispensable resource for all those who question the platitudes of vulgar Marxism. Best wishes, Rohini." So thank you very much, Rohini. She didn't think she could be here today, but if she comes, she can speak up. The next message of good wishes comes from Nick Rogers. He says, I won't be able to attend because I'm away on Sunday. However, I will catch up afterwards, and please feel free to read out or add the following greeting to the chat. And I'm trying to get it. Okay. Oh, geez. Hold on one second. Congratulations to Radio Free Humanity on reaching your 100th episode and the contribution you've made to spreading and developing the ideas of socialism. Here is to the next 100 episodes, Nick Rogers. I hope it goes well. Thank you, Nick. And there's one more greeting from someone who has starred in 2 Radio Free Humanity episodes. That's Matt Holmgoltz-Hetling. A huge congrats on your 100th. I have both a question and a comment. The question, who was your favorite guest that talked about libertarians and bears and medical quackery? The comment, I thought it was great when we talked about libertarians and bears and medical quackery. But for reals, you bring such an important and interesting perspective to the issues of the day. I'm always impressed by your insights, and I know your audience will be there to hear episodes number 101 through 200. Okay, thank you, Matt. Do we have any other greetings on the line here? Here's a message from, oh no, it's our first question. Okay, is everybody ready for the first question?
Yes.
Very good.
Well, we got a question from Matt Holmgoltz-Hetling.
Oh, I didn't think he really expected an answer.
He was my favorite guest that talked about libertarians and bears and quacks. And he's also my least favorite guest that talked about he's the only one who talked about that with us because he wrote a book about that. Really, really great book on the libertarians and bears. Libertarian walked into a bear, and a really great book on, I think it's, if it quacks like a quack or quacks like a duck or something about the medical quackery in relationship to COVID. But I'm really humbled and pleased by the 3 greetings from the guests. Rohini, who she's been on 2 podcasts as well, one about her book and one about her intervention concerning the war on Ukraine, and Nick Rogers, who talked about the special issue of Journal of Global Fault Lines on the idea of socialism for the 21st century. So, you know, and Matt, so I'm really honored to just, I'm just kind of choked up by their very generous greetings.
Okay. Unless Brendan wants to comment on the greetings.
No, go ahead, Ann. Why don't you read the
Yeah,
first
let's
question?
start the questions. This first one comes from Van Sewell. Congratulations on episode 100. What was the original inspiration motivation for the Radio Free Humanity podcast?
Do you remember, Brendan?
I have my own memory, but it might not be the same as your memory, and I don't always.
That's exactly what I was thinking. So why don't you go first?
Well, I think that there was some discussion going on within MHI about starting a podcast, but things weren't really getting off the ground. And I think might have been one of the last times I saw you in person before the pandemic, Andrew. We were at a Left Forum afterwards having dinner somewhere, and I said, why don't we just kind of restart this podcast thing, and the 2 of us will just kind of get it going, and we'll just see what happens. And so I put together a proposal, but I don't want to bother people with the technical details of how we got things moving, but I believe the idea was to provide, for one, just an alternative forum for um, people within MHI to advance Marxist-Humanist um, writings in a different format, in an audio format, since podcasts are so popular now, but also to give a little more of a chance for us to um, comment on current events, on things that are happening every week or every month in the world politics, and just kind of be a little more on top of the, I don't want to say news cycle, but on top of the pulse of what's happening in the world. Um, I think also one of my thoughts was that, Andrew, you've written on so many different topics, and I was hoping just to find I was hoping we could make a format where you could, um, I think that you, Andrew, you are very careful and conscientious and scholarly about how you prepare your written material for publication, even if it's just an article for the with sober senses. But
Even if it's just an email message to you. Yeah.
yeah, even if it's just an email message, it's like extremely carefully, written out. And but then sometimes when we've talked informally, I will hear you talk about other things that I've never seen you write about, because probably if you were under the obligation to write about them, it would take you a lot of preparation to do those things. And so I thought, well, if this sort of more informal podcast format might provide a forum for you to share some of those thoughts you have on a wide variety of topics without kind of having the pressure to like do all of the research and thinking to create like a perfectly written argument on paper. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. I mean,
Yeah.
that's
So
exactly what you
yeah,
told me.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, my memory of all this is basically in tune with you. If I remember, we were talking about, the possibility of doing this podcast. You and I were, at the same time, I was telling you about the history of MMT, modern monetary theory, and Warren
right,
Mosler and
right,
all of that, which is
yeah,
kind of shocking. But yeah, see, my original idea was to do like Ben Shapiro watch and Jordan Peterson watch and Rick Wolf watch, where we would like look at what these people say and call them out.
hmm,
And so I said, look, I can do it if I get people to research this. It wasn't happening. It wasn't happening. It wasn't happening. Brendan did something. It wasn't happening. So eventually Brendan and I are there and we're like, well, look, if this is going to happen, it's going to be us. I think, that's what Brendan said to me or something. And I go, yeah, it's going to be us. So, let's try it. So we tried it, and then, we just keep trying it. I mean, it's like, sometimes I'm amazed, and I think Brendan's amazed that we managed to get through, one episode, and oh my God, now we look forward to the next. We don't have a guest, we don't have anything. But so we don't have this Rick Wolf watch, and we don't have the Ben Shapiro watch, but to a large extent, the podcast has turned out to be like Jacobin watch and Trump World watch. So some of that critical function is part of the podcast series.
yeah.
Okay, I'm going to take another message. This one from Darren Poynton in England. Congratulations on reaching 100 episodes. My question is, how do you conceive of freedom? And how does this conception affect your activities and the content of the podcast? Many thanks, Darren Poynton.
Okay. Um, I, um,
Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose.
No, no.
No, I always go back to the way Marx put it. Freedom is so much the essence of human beings, or the nature of human beings, that freedom has always existed. It's always there. The only difference is sometimes it's the special privilege, let's say, of the king, the ruling class or whatever. So sometimes freedom exists as a special privilege, but then there's also freedom as universal right. So, we talk about freedom, but, what we're really for is freedom of humanity as a whole, freedom as a universal right. But it's not just like legal political freedom. It also has to do with the expansion of human capacities and talents and so forth, and that emerges historically. And the species is not what it was 100,000 years ago. So we have the capability of being a lot more free than we were, because we can know a lot more. We can do a lot more. We can extend the tools given by our bodies, our hands and our arms and our legs. We've got all kinds of tools and so forth. The problem is we've got a social system and a mode of production, capitalism, that is thwarting that for a very simple reason. It's not what it's about. Capitalism is not about universal freedom. So why would it provide universal freedom? So this is how I conceive of the issue of freedom today. How does this affect the activities and the content of the podcast? I hope that this is, what we orient the podcast around in every way, either directly or indirectly, this struggle for freedom. And it's, again, directly or indirectly. I mean, I do a lot of things that don't seem to be about freedom, like, preparing a list of who's been a guest on the podcast, but indirectly, everything is really about that.
I think a lot of the topics that we're covering well, first of all, like, this is an essential part of what we're trying to do on the podcast, is to not just treat topics in isolation, not just to have a guest on that is interesting to listen to, but to develop Marxist humanism as a philosophy, and to engage directly with what's happening in the world, and to develop those ideas in that engagement with things. So a lot of the topics that we've engaged on over the past 100 episodes have had this question of the struggle for freedom at the center of that engagement, whether it be discussing the concept of self-determination in relationship to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, whether talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, whether talking about the struggle against post-truth and all the different dimensions of that, because of course, the so essential to freedom is the idea that humans can use can use reason to further their freedom. And if we move backwards into superstition and emotive thinking, intuitive thinking, then we're kind of working against those that potential for freedom in civilization. Pushing back and reacting to the sort of the way that freedom was used during the COVID pandemic by the right as a completely denuded concept that was just reduced to the right to be an asshole to other people, and the way the concept of freedom almost became the opposite of turned into its opposite by the Trumpite base, and by the Trumpite politicians during the COVID pandemic, and trying to articulate the need for a different notion of freedom that isn't just like the freedom to give you disease if I don't feel like wearing a mask. So there have been so many different ways that this quite basic question, which is like really at the center of Marxist humanism, has pervaded a lot of the discussions we've had.
Okay. Let me just remind our listeners that if they want to submit a question to the host, at the very bottom of the chat, there's a space to direct message, and you just write it in there, send it off with the little arrow on the right, and it will get to our moderator who is picking the questions for us. I'm going to read another one. This one's from Francisco Palacios in Latin America. He says, I learned a lot that I didn't expect on your episode on Chomsky's anti-imperialism. I was surprised to see that his positions on imperialism are basically Stalinist, but worldwide he's flaunted as one of the main intellectuals of anarchism. Why do you think that Chomsky's positions aren't really challenged within anarchism? And on the other hand, do you think there is something within anarchism that permits these theories and authoritarian personalities to dominate? Shouldn't anarchism being one of the more radical theories be fortified against these kinds of derailments?
There's a lot of good questions in there. I mean, I think one, I think that I can't remember all the things we discussed on that Chomsky episode, and there were a few different times that Chomsky came up, but there were some anarchists who were critiquing Chomsky on this very point early in the Ukraine war, and I remember
And one of them we had on the podcast. Bill Weinberg. We had two episodes on Chomsky. First of all, Bill Weinberg, did his takedown of Chomsky going back, I don't know, decades. That was a whole episode. And then we had David Columbia on talking about both Chomsky's politics and Chomsky's linguistics. So
we had Rohini Hensman on talking about it. And there was some anarchist who had written something criticizing Chomsky. I feel like maybe we even talked about that written thing we found somewhere, and I can't remember now. So anyway, it's not like that all anarchists are with Chomsky on this. In fact, it seems like he's gotten more criticism during this Ukraine stuff than he has in the past, just to be fair. But it is a good question. I mean, I think my first instinct in answering that is just that the anti-imperialist kind of politics are just so easy to fall into, especially if you live in the US and you're just so used to, for decades, fighting against US imperialism. It's just really hard to get out of that mentality and like understand that there are other bad actors on the global stage. And to get out of this idea that like all of geopolitics can be reduced to the US versus other people. I think it's hard for people to get out of that mentality, whether or not they're regardless of where they identify in the political spectrum. That's my first instinct. I don't know. What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I basically agree. I think, I mean, so Bill Weinberg is an anarchist. He's, died in the war, 100% anarchist, and he absolutely loathes, everything that Chomsky stands for. But I mean, part of it is all kinds of people call themselves anarchists, and they mean all kinds of things. The late David Graeber, is supposedly anti-state, but like, when the Great Recession happened, he's basically, on Democracy Now! And everywhere else, coming just to the line of explicitly advocating, the kind of policies, Keynesian policies that all the statist leftists were recommending. So, I mean, basically, I think one has to come up to the point where you say, anarchism is not a total philosophy. It's not a total outlook. It focuses on one thing, and that one thing just isn't sufficient. It doesn't carry the day. It's not a substitute for, a total philosophy or outlook. So I think that's part of it. I think that, the dominant thing, though, is there is just like, the cookie cutter standard left politics, knee-jerk anti-imperialism, which is pseudo-anti-imperialism, like Brendan said. But I mean, the other thing that goes on in anarchism, and this was promoted in particular by David Graeber, is, what we do is we unite on the basis of action. We don't unite on the basis of ideas, because that's divisive, and your ideas are your business. He said this like in almost, this is almost a direct verbatim quote. He wrote this in New Left Review. Discussion of ideas is implicit. Our ideas is implicit, and we want it to stay that way. So what you think is your business, you're not going to ever convince anybody totally. They're not going to ever convince you totally. So there's never a testing of ideas. So wherever anybody's coming from, that just sits. There's nothing within this way of organizing and being an anarchist to separate the wheat from the chaff, the true from the false, the forward moving from the reactionary.
Okay. Shall we move to the next question?
Yeah, let me go to the next question.
Okay. I'm waiting for the next question. Okay, here's one from Ravi Bali in England. You have spent a lot of time discussing Trump and Trumpism. How do you respond to the accusation that you are suffering from Trump derangement syndrome? Hosts?
Is that an accusation? Is that a abstract accusation, or can I go somewhere to see someone accusing Radio Free Humanity of having Trump derangement syndrome? I guess.
I don't know. Maybe he'll write again.
Yeah.
Is TDS in the DSM?
I don't know. Trump is good at like gaslighting people whenever they come close to realizing what reality is. It's just crazy that I guess Jews during the Holocaust had Hitler derangement syndrome. I don't know. It's just ridiculous that this idea that we're going to call people who are opposed to Trumpism like somehow irrational actors. Like there is reality. I think we're trying really hard to understand it and live in it, and it's very clear that there is a war against that reality or people's ability to understand reality, and that's all the stuff that Trump has a certain genius for, all the terms he has a genius for creating, whether it's calling real news fake news, or calling people that are interested in reality the ones who have derangement syndrome. It's just all like Orwellian fascist propaganda. There's no substance to it and it's also just a way of like dismissing people's criticism or people's ideas, so you don't listen to it and you just label it as something that's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, the people who in 2015 and 2016 seemed like, Chicken Little, the sky is falling. Well, we were right. The sky was falling. The liberal democracy is in serious danger around the world, especially in the United States. It sounded like people were exaggerating, but Trump has surpassed the wildest exaggerations about what he might do. With the one exception yet is, during his first term, he didn't manage to rain nukes down on anybody. Hopefully he won't get a second term. But the worst came to pass again and again and again, and it's not going away. So, I mean, where is the derangement there? This is not a rhetorical question, Ravi. So you can, if you heard this, you can dox the people that you heard it from. We can go there and, gun them down or whatever. Just kidding.
No, I forget what I was going to say. It is remarkable how many people have stuck on the left, have stuck to. I mean, I think most people have understood the danger of Trumpism and the threat to democracy, but there still are people who have clung to various versions of this this approach of minimalizing the threat of Trumpism for various reasons. And I just find that so shocking. I don't quite understand what sort of headspace you have to be in to continually deny the existence of something that's right in front of your face. I just don't understand how people can do that on a day-to-day basis, unless they have a lot to gain from it personally. Maybe someone like Chris Cutrone, who's just dug in on a position because his intellectual reputation is attached to that position or something, but I don't know. But we also live in this world where people are able to deny the existence of reality, despite huge evidence against it. And I feel like we can't just expect that things will get bad enough that they will realize they're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is the problem with climate denialism. I think I still have this instinct when I see that the weather is insane all summer long. I have this intuition that it means that people will realize that climate change is real, but then I have to continually disabuse myself of that fantasy, because a large amount of America, I can't quote the percentage, but a large percentage of Americans do not believe in climate change. And I don't think they're going to change their position, even if they, their house, the forest fires consume their house, hurricanes flood their town, they get third-degree burns from touching the sidewalk, regardless of what happens to them, they're going to still deny that reality. So, I mean, I guess that's why philosophical debate and engagement on real ideas is so crucial, is because we can't just assume that reality itself will make people face their delusions with sober senses. There needs to be some kind of intervention.
Okay, I think Ravi has answered his own question, or your question to him. He adds a note here. It's an accusation that soft on Trump leftist level at MHI. Right. So the problem is
Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah,
well,
soft on him.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're suffering from Trump appeasement syndrome.
Yeah.
And left firstism, and basically, Brendan talked about the whole thing on the left whereby they minimize the danger of Trumpism, and it's absolutely true. The issue is, why do they do that? The reason is, because they got to create their brand, and they've got to differentiate their brand from, let's say, the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party, and the resistance, those are liberals, and those are this, and those are that. So they got to be different. They got to have, their issues, because the future of humanity depends on 10 more people, 10,000 more people joining their organizations, supposedly. I mean, that's part of it. And the other is, the threat to freedoms, the threat to liberal democracy, voting rights and so forth. Those things have never been the issues of a lot of people who call themselves on the left. And that's, disturbing, and that's been disturbing for decades. But if your whole shtick is income redistribution, by any means necessary, then a lot of people, I think, would who call themselves on the left would like to have a benevolent dictatorship to impose something like that. They don't come out and say that, but look at how often they don't talk about issues of human rights, of liberal democratic rights, and so forth. So I think we have no alternative, but when they sling accusations, to say when you point a finger, 4 fingers are pointing back at you, when we got to give it to them 4 times.
Yeah, it does.
Go ahead.
Well, it does get to this question of like freedom as like an orienting principle for liberatory politics over some sort of other orientation. And I think Andrew is right that because there are a lot of people in parts of the left that have this orientation where there are things that they want to do as leftists that are basically like social democracy, income redistribution programs, and things that are not that they just dismiss as distractions. Cultural issues, distraction issues, abortion has been the right to have an abortion has been derided as a distraction issue for a long time. They have all these different terms for dismissing them, and even the terms they use are like very kind of elitist. To call something like the right to an abortion a distraction from the real issues, or to call like fight against racism or concerns about authoritarianism as distractions is just very elitist and insulting to a lot of people whose lives, whose day-to-day freedom is like impinged on by those things. So that's what I think hopefully a philosophical discussion can get to, these like root differences between perspectives, and then people can think about what sort of philosophical perspective is appropriate for real libertarian politics. But when we just like label people's positions with like buzzwords like Trump derangement syndrome or whatever, we're not really doing anything philosophically. We're just kind of creating like hashtags to label things and put people in categories in like the kind of juvenile cat fights for the internet.
All right, here's a not unrelated question from Torov Dassler. Recent episodes discuss the way the Trumpite base thinks, and that many people are not willing to be persuaded in debates and do not like changing their views. Can we discuss the reasons for that thinking a bit more?
Well, but this is, by the way, something we're going to keep talking about on the podcast series. We've got a couple of guests who are going to be on the podcast within the next few episodes. The authors of a book, When Bad Thinking Happens to Good People. Both co-authors are going to be on the podcast, and they have their views. And this is something that nobody really knows the answer to, if there is indeed one answer. That's what I would say. This is something, whenever I see anything about this, I pay attention and I read it. but I think that the way that Tarov posed the issue is exactly right, and that people often don't pose it this way, and the discussion doesn't move as far forward as it could because it gets posed in less helpful ways. So let me see exactly how he put it. They're not willing to be persuaded in debates and do not like changing their views. Okay, so I think that that's exactly the right way to put it. And basically, here's the thing that I think is underappreciated when we talk about what people believe, what people don't believe. To a philosopher, belief means something very particular, very clean cut, having to do with facts and evidence. You know, you've got a statement and it's a proposition. So that means it could either be true or it could be false. So you have a proposition, and if you believe that it's true, you believe it. Okay, you believe what the proposition says. If you think it's false, you don't believe what the proposition says. I think that a lot of the people in the world, maybe a majority, God, you know, who knows, but a lot of people don't go through life thinking in terms of propositions and whether they're true or false. Okay, it's like belief in God. You know, belief in God is like not, well, for most people, I think it's not, you know, there is a supernatural being that does exist, you know, in real time. And I believe as a factual proposition in that. I'm sure there are people who think like that. But for a lot of people, belief in God is like, you know, belief in God, the way Terry Eagleton put it is, you know, people believed in God the way I believe in you. You know, I got like confidence in you. People have faith in God, confidence in God. They've got belief. They've got, you know, belief that Trump is right. It has very little to do with, you know, the factual content of what he says when it is understood as propositions. Now, what do we do about that? Okay, I think that that's really dominant. What do we do about that? We can either say, okay, we got to, like, you know, open ourselves up to a whole different language game, you know, a whole other mode of discourse, or we could say, yeah, okay, that's all well and good, but, you know, when you need bridges that you have to cross, you know, when you need bodies that need to be healed, when you need a social system, you know, that needs to be repaired and overthrown, et cetera, et cetera. One way of going about things is at best not very useful, and at most extremely harmful. And, you know, I don't think we're going to convince the people who like to rely on their gut intuitions and what feels good to them, you know, but we have to reach, I think, or try to reach those people who will say, yeah, we got to state propositions and see whether the content of those statements is true and false. That's the only hope, I think, for humanity. You know, I'm not saying instead of the struggle for socialism, you know, it's got to be part of that. And certainly the struggle for socialism cannot move forward in this day and age, in this post-truth environment, unless it's battling that, because it's strangling all of us. I don't have an answer there, just a thought that might help move the conversation a bit forward.
I would just add that, you know, a lot of people on the Trumpite base, their beliefs aren't really, I agree with Andrew that their beliefs aren't really discrete beliefs. They're more like statements of allegiance. And we've seen that so many times in the past, you know, whatever, 7 years or so, that issues will come up, and especially around, like, the big example is the Black Lives Matter movement, where it hadn't been worked out yet what the Trumpites' relationship was to that issue for, I don't know, weeks or months. And we saw, like, polling really shift once the messaging around the Black Lives Matter became one in which the Black Lives Matter movement was considered I don't know, whatever they call it, woke or anti-cop or whatever it was. Then all of a sudden, we saw the polls really swing and have a really clear lines drawn between the Trumpite base and the rest of the country on that issue. Climate change is an issue like that. Climate change used to be like a accepted scientific fact, and then oil companies, started this PR campaign specifically appealing to the type of demographic base we now refer to as the Trumpite base. They were pitching their anti-science messages to older white men who were, what do they call it, not information seeking, and pitch that message to them. They were able to like kind of change the people's orientation to truth such that people stop believing in reality and identified with climate denialism. But I think a lot of these things, you obviously, we've talked about this before in the podcast. You see like some poll comes out, 44% of Americans believe X, and X is like some ridiculous thing, it's not, is it really that they believe that, or are they responding that way to polls because they think that that is the way to support Trump, by saying they believe that you can drink bleach to cure COVID, or you believe in whatever crazy nonsense that Trump said that week. So when people's beliefs are reduced to just tribal allegiance, signals of allegiance, it becomes really difficult to have conversation. I'm not the only person saying this, right? It's like a symptom of like a real social disorder, real breakdown of the social fabric, because it's really difficult to have conversations and to have any advancement in civil society, in politics, when everything is just about taking sides and fighting for power. It's just like a pure politics of power, and there's nothing. It's very difficult for the kind of thing we want to do, where we're trying to actually engage with ideas and have truth be a standard. And it's extremely difficult to do that, and I don't think anyone really knows how to solve those issues right now.
Yeah, and even what some political scientists, I think mostly political scientists, are trying to do is, when they get answers to survey questions about what people believe in this and that, they've even got a term. I think it's something like expressive responses, where people are expressing themselves. They're being performative when they give answers to the survey questions, rather than making a statement about the truth value of a proposition. So they've even designed like tests to try to tell what is going on. Is this an expressive response, just performative, or people actually saying, I believe that the ballot boxes were tampered by the Italians, or God knows what, right? I don't think their tests are very good at discriminating against that, but at least they're trying, and at least people are, becoming more aware of this issue of like, just asking people what they believe. It's not like obvious what that means at all. I mean, that's the key thing to take away from this, is when somebody says, I believe this, or they say this is the way it is, don't take at face value that you know what they're saying.
And in the same vein, Gabriel Donnelly asks, I was wondering if you could say more about how we can't rely on people who rely on their gut intuitions. Isn't so much of the left as it exists now completely reliant on appealing to those intuitions? Crude Johnsonism and Taylism and Grossmanism all do this.
I'm not sure what he means by crude Johnsonism. I'm not going to accuse C.L.R. James, J.R. Johnson, of that without knowing more. Tailism means, I guess, tail-ending foreign dictators, like Putin, or tail-ending, I don't know, could be the Democratic Party. Grossmanism, yeah. Definitely Grossmanism relies on intuition. Grossman understood a lot, but he made a fatal flaw. He takes over this scheme of reproduction from Otto Bauer, says it shows the economy breaks down. He knows that the scheme of reproduction doesn't work. It's a toy. It needs to be modified. So he says, okay, I'm going to modify it. But hey, after I modify it, the system still breaks down. But what? That conclusion that after he modified it, the system still breaks down, that was just based on his intuition. He didn't do any calculations or anything. So that's the fatal flaw. And I think more generally, the appeal of Grossmanism today relies on a lot of intuitions, just like the intuition that everything's falling apart. Okay, so the economy's got to break down, right? Why? Because, it can't keep, getting worse and worse and keep going on. Well, that's an intuition. But also there are mathematical intuitions that are wrong, I think, that are involved in this. Like, okay, you have like the value of the commodities, and part of it is recovery of the amount laid out on means of production, the constant capital. And part of it's the recovery of the amount laid out in wages, and part of it's profit. Right, now imagine that over time, the constant capital part gets bigger and bigger and bigger as a share of the total price of the commodities. And imagine that keeps on going forever. Eventually, use your intuition, what does that constant capital share of the price of the product or the value of the product have to be? How big of a percentage of the price or value of the total product? Use your intuition. Now, don't use your intuition and think about it. And I'm not going to tell you the answer. Maybe I'll tell you in the second hour here. Okay, but it's really dangerous to use your intuitions. There was, I think it was at Caltech, there was a professor, or maybe he was like provost or dean or something. Anyways, some guy said, don't rely on your intuitions when you don't have them. And he was basically saying, with regard to certain scientific and mathematical intuitions, certain people did not really know enough to have any intuitions about the subject matter that would serve them well.
Intuitions are bad. You just have to not rely on them.
Absolutely. It's just like people say emotions, like, oh, these rationalists are against emotion. No. I mean, you go back and you look at Plato, and he's saying, look, without emotions, there wouldn't be anything, so yeah, you got to have emotion. You do have intuition, and it can be helpful. It can, alert you to things you would not otherwise see, or you can maybe see them faster. But it's not a check. It's not a test of what's true and false. It's not a substitute for what's true and false. You want to know what's true and false, you got to do some real testing, not rely on the intuitions. That's the whole problem, and that is the way Gabriel put it, but I mean, so it's the reliance on intuition, and it's all the forces out there that are having people rely on their intuitions. And, they don't have to say, I rely on you, I'm trying to make you rely on your intuitions. But when people put forward content and they just give a kind of a hand-waving justification of it that's not a real demonstration. Maybe it's not always appropriate to do that, but it's got to come in somewhere, a real demonstration of what you're saying. If that's lacking, then you're basically saying, oh, I just want people to like what they like, don't like what they don't like, rely on their intuitions. So people are encouraging that really unhelpful and lazy way of thinking. And so, yeah, there's too much reliance on intuition and too much tolerance for reliance on intuition, in my view.
Okay, let's take one more question and then have a break for you to have a break. It'll be about 3 minutes long, but first let's do Teresa H's question. On the topic of Ukraine, the podcast has talked about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, campism, imperialist economism, and pseudo-imperialism a number of times. I agree with positions of the hosts and MHI's editorial from last year. Yet I've been unable to respond sufficiently to the criticism I've encountered. How would both of the hosts respond to the claim coming from the anti-war left that supporting the Ukrainian resistance means playing with the possibility of nuclear war?
It's a good question. I guess the question is like what the alternatives are. I mean, that would be my first thought. What are the alternatives to if you're not supporting the resistance and you're basically letting Russia take over Ukraine, and you think that if your logic was just that we have to let Russia take over Ukraine in order to avoid nuclear war, I don't think there's any reason to think that that Putin's going to stop with Ukraine, and that I don't think there's any reason to think that some future nuclear standoff is going to be like it's not going to happen because Putin's going to be dissatisfied by taking over Ukraine. So I just don't see there is a danger of nuclear war, but I don't see it like going away because Putin's allowed to take over Ukraine.
I agree with that. And also, try to understand the thinking of people who talk like this. Okay, it would be Putin that would be, launching nuclear war. Okay, so the possibility of nuclear war is coming from Putin. So let's not deal with the cause, Putin. Let's appease Putin, throw the Ukrainians to the dogs, sacrifice them so that the rest of us, can feel safe. Well, I'm sorry. I am not willing to throw other people, they're striving for national self-determination. I'm not willing to throw them under the bus. I don't want nuclear war, but so the point is we have to do what we can to prevent nuclear war, but not at the cost of, telling other people, to sacrifice themselves, not at the cost of refusing to stand in solidarity with their, struggle for national self-determination. So we have to have two things at once, and we have to work out how we can prevent nuclear war in particular, while standing with, the Ukrainians' battle to free their country from imperialist invasion. And the best way is to topple the Putin regime okay, to encourage the forces in Russia. Unfortunately, a lot of them are now in exile, okay, to take back their country from the Putinites. Okay, that I think is the perspective. What I would love to see, and to some extent it happened in the 1930s in Spain. You had the Phalangists, Franco, but you had international armed support, from socialists and others from abroad who were helping, the Spanish democracy defend itself. Unfortunately, they lost, but they gave it a good try, defend itself from fascism. What I would like to see is that international support, to encourage the freedom fighters that might be able to rise up then in Russia. To some extent, there is some, popular foreign support within Ukraine for the Ukrainians too. But yes, we have to prevent nuclear war, but not at the cost of, us telling other people they got to sacrifice their freedom and national self-determination. Who are we to tell them?
Okay, are we ready for break now?
Yeah, we'll
You're
do a quick 3-minute break.
3 minutes, yeah, and you'll hear from me talking about MHI. So let's go. We'll be back.
Bye-bye, boys and girls.
Marxist-Humanist Initiative, or MHI, aims to contribute to the transformation of this capitalist world by projecting, developing, and concretizing the philosophy of Karl Marx and its further development in the Marxist humanism articulated by Raya Dunayevskaya. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and today's many other social, political, and economic crises make this a moment to engage people in discussion of these ideas. In the U.S., we are faced with the threat of Trumpism triumphing, an all-out authoritarianism extinguishing our right to carry on these discussions. Yet at the same moment, the multiracial movement for Black lives has spread to every corner of the country and the world, launching a flood of activism and new ideas that deepen the concept of freedom. MHI is dedicated to the task of proving theoretically that an alternative to capitalism is possible. We are distinguished by our economic analyses in which we do not merely assert but demonstrate that the only opposite to the current world economic system is its abolition and replacement with one not based on the production of, quote, value, close quote. Because capitalism cannot be fundamentally reformed, attempts to reform it lead to an intensification of state capitalism, not to socialism. We are not a political party, nor are we trying to lead the masses who will form their own organization and whose emancipation must be their own act. But we have seen that spontaneous actions alone are insufficient to usher in a new society. We seek a new unity of philosophy and organization in which mass movements striving for freedom lay hold of Marxist philosophy of revolution and recreate society on its basis. Our ideas and actions, as well as our structure and rules, are guided by the interests of working people and freedom movements of people of color, LGBTQ people, other minorities, women, youth, and all those around the world who are struggling for self-determination in order to freely develop their own human natures. We have no interests separate and apart from theirs. To this end, we open our website to the widest possible dialogue with people around the world. We intend to practice as well as espouse a two-way road between our organization and people outside it as essential to developing a single dialectic in the relationship of theory to practice and as the way to assure the survival of Marxist humanism. Please join us. Okay. Let us continue. Teresa wanted to correct a statement where it appeared she was talking about pseudo-anti-imperialism or imperialism. She was talking about pseudo-anti-imperialism. And along the same lines here, Stephanie Levy asks, please describe or define what is pseudo-anti-imperialism and what is authentic or real anti-imperialism. Oh, we don't have Brendan back. Andrew, do you want to start?
I'll give a partial comment. Sorry, I was muted. What I would suggest is reading Roni Hensman's book on this, which I believe is called Indefensible. And we did an episode of Radio for Humanity with her speaking about the book. We went into it at, some length, and she basically defines what she means. But one way you can tell that so-called anti-imperialism is pseudo is that it's partial, and typically it's against Western imperialism, US imperialism, but like not Putin's imperialism against the Ukrainians, etc. And this goes on again and again throughout the world. Now, the pseudo-anti-imperialists give a response to that, and they always, or typically they say, oh, it's, that's not imperialism. Well, why is, that not imperialism? Why is it only the imperialism when the US is, doing bad things against other nations, or countries allied with the US? And they always talk about export of capital, and that means, foreign investment. So supposedly, Lenin defined imperialism as export of capital, this foreign investment, and therefore it's not imperialism unless the country is, engaging in foreign investment in the country that it's dominating. Well, first of all, I think Roni Hensman is right that Lenin, his phrasing was not the best in his pamphlet, but that's not what he did. It's not what he said. He didn't define imperialism in those terms and say, if there is not foreign investment, then it is not imperialism. Lenin talked about the U.S. War of Independence, 1776 and all that. He said that was a struggle against British imperialism, and the Americans were being aided by another imperialist power, which was France. So, and that had nothing to do with foreign investment and stuff. So the pseudo-ness of the anti-imperialism, I think, can be tested by seeing that it's one-sided. And whenever you start to hear people going on excessively, exclusively about this so-called export of capital, in particular when they use that phrase, that's a tip-off. Okay, if you really want to be genuinely anti-imperialist, you got to stand for, national self-determination struggles across the board, independent of, without regard to who their enemy is, whether it's the US, whether it's Putin's Russia, or whatever it would be.
Okay, Brendan, if you want.
I don't have anything to add on that one.
Okay, there's a message that says, if you're trying to send in a chat, make sure the blue box in the chat box says MHI host. And to click on it if it says something else, so that you get a in the drop-down menu. Does everyone see that on the bottom of the chat?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I believe that Brendan, you wanted to ask about the Grossman classes. Do you want to do that now?
Yeah, we're going to have MHI is hosting 2 classes discussing Henrik Grossman's breakdown theory and a criticism that Andrew has written of Grossman. We talked about this in the podcast, and I don't off the top of my head remember which episode it was. We had a nice long discussion about Andrew's paper. And we also talked about the Grossman stuff when we interviewed a Grossmanite author. Andrew, do you remember the guy's name off the top of my head or your head?
Ted Reese. I don't remember off the top of your head. I remember it off the top of my own head.
Yeah, Ted Reese. So we've covered it, and maybe listeners are somewhat familiar with the issues. And we're going to, these classes are also going to have some guest speakers. Andrew, who are those people?
Yeah, we have 4 discussants. There's going to be 2 classes. And I just sent a link to the MHI host, which is the article in With Sober Senses, just announcing the classes. It's got a Zoom link for how to participate in the classes. You go on to Zoom. It's got some more stuff. Among the things that are discussed in the article are who the discussants are going to be. There's going to be more stuff added to that article. And, so I hope to have just a little outline of what's going to be covered on a given day. I might have some slides, study questions. I hope to have some study questions added to that article within the next few days. So there are going to be 2 classes, each 2 hours. The first class is September 24, and the discussants are going to be Alan Freeman, who, I've worked a lot with in the past, and Esteban Mora, an economist from Costa Rica. And then 2 weeks later, on October 8th, second class, same basic topic, Henrik Grossman's breakdown model and breakdown theory. And so I'll be talking again, giving a presentation, and followed by 2 discussants. And they are going to be Nick Potts, who I've worked with for a long time, and Sebastian Hernandez Solorza, who I believe is on the Zoom call today. I saw him before. So we'll have 2 discussants again. I'll present, discussant comment, another discussant comment, and then we've got chat. The chat will work pretty much like the chat's working today, but it's not going to be as rigorously, moderated, and but people will should be able to ask comments, should be able to ask questions, make comments. And I also hope to, look at the chat from time to time during my presentation. So it's not just me standing up there, lecturing. If people have a question about what I'm saying, while I'm presenting, if there's something unclear, I want to kind of like nip all those kinds of problems in the bud. So, putting a question in the chat would be like raising your hand. And, so I'll look at that and try to deal with that at the time. So, 2 sessions, both 1 to 3 p.m., both on Sunday, one in 2 weeks, September 24, 1 2 weeks later from that, October 8. They're going to be based on Henrik Grossman's book, The Law of Accumulation and Breakdown of Capitalism, or whatever it's called. My article, talking about why the Grossman stuff doesn't work. So there's a link to that in the thing that's just been posted in your chat. Grossman classes, Zoom link, and more at that article. So you're going to see, it's based on Grossman's book, my article. I got some comments and challenges and questions about that article, and I wrote a second article responding to them. So there's also a link to that might come into the discussion somehow. And then Ted Reese, who we had on the podcast, I wrote a review of his book, and that some of that might come into the classes as well. So at this point, I would say, those are the things to read. Grossman's book, it's only, about 500 pages. You should be able to read that, in an afternoon. Very long-winded. What I would really recommend, if you want to understand Grossman's book and to do it in a quick way, skip all of the literature review, skip all of the polemics where he's, disagreeing with other people. Just read the rest of it. It's going to be a very partial reading, but it's a way to boil down, 500 pages into maybe 150. So look at that. Look at my first article, second article, and the book review of Ted Reese's book on Grossman. And I do hope to, as I said, in that article where you see the link in the chat, I hope to add to that article with very brief outline of the topics in the first session, and then, hopefully some study questions within the next few days. Had to get through today first, and we're getting through today first, but if we do manage to make it through the rest of the hour, you can hope for and anticipate study questions coming soon.
Okay, and if you forget any of this, it's all in our on our website, and the our publication page, and elsewhere throughout our website, Marxist-Humanist Initiative.org. And you can also always write to us by email and ask what happened to this or that, but you'll see it there.
Let me say just a couple of things.
Yes.
More about this in terms of the motivation for these classes. One thing is, the reason this is important is Grossmanism, is not going away. And I even heard recently that there's this guy who calls himself a MAGA communist, right? Real horseshoe theory. He's endorsed Grossman, so he's now in the Grossman camp. It's not going away, and it's not going away for this intuition that, everything's going all to hell, so it's all got to break down. And, really doesn't matter, if for whatever reason, that's the underlying intuition. So it's not going away. The other thing is, my article, I don't like to take a lot of credit for a lot of things typically. You know, if what I'm saying is not original, I try to say it's not original. This article was original in some ways. It has new results. I show that the idea of a breakdown tendency of the Grossman type, where there's not enough profit or surplus value to continue accumulation at the current pace. Okay, that breakdown tendency that Grossman posited, okay, that is incompatible with Marx's value theory. If technical progress causes commodities values to decline because they don't need as much labor to produce, then the breakdown tendency just disappears. This is a new result. It's obviously an extremely important result when, you know, the whole basis of the discussion is like, well, no, that doesn't exist. But my article has not gotten the attention that I think it deserves, because the immediate Grossman world is, you know, pretending that it doesn't exist, with the exception of Ted Rees. You know, there should be discussion. We should be separating the wheat from the chaff, the true from the false, looking at propositions, testing propositions. But it's the sound of like one hand clapping at this point. And all I can do is try to, at this point, you know, turn more attention, turn a spotlight back to these questions.
Okay, let's take another question. Today, we got a Hegel question. This is from Jimmy Padalano. The negation of the negation, quotes, is sometimes interpreted as an, quote, apparent return to the old, close quote, such as notably Lenin in his abstract of Hegel's Science of Logic. Is there some sense in which Marx's revolutionary humanism or his concept of a negation of the negation constitutes an, quote, apparent return to the old, close quote?
Andrew, I don't know the significance. I have two questions, and maybe you understand the significance of them, because it's hard to ask Jimmy for clarification. But the quotes around apparent return to the old, do you know what that is a reference to?
Yeah, Lenin's conspectus of Hegel's Science of Logic during the Middle World War I. You know, Hegel's there. I think he's in Bern, Switzerland, and he rereads the Science of Logic. You know, this is after the socialist parties, you know, big social democratic parties, they all collapsed because of siding with their countries in World War I. Something seriously has gone wrong when revolutionaries turn into these patriots. So Lenin is like, whoa, you know, I got to get my thinking right. I can't keep like relying on Kautsky and keep relying on Hilferding and keep relying on all of these people, you know, who've capitulated to the war effort. So he turns again to Hegel, and I think it's pretty much near the end of the Science of Logic. He writes down a list of points, and he gets to the negation of the negation, and he characterizes it as apparent return to the old. So that's a way of characterizing negation of negation. Okay, that idea of negation, I mean, there is that kind of negation of negation, for instance, in mathematics. You know, you've got A and logic. You've got A, you've got not A, and you've got not A. Well, that not A is a negation of the negation. The negation is not A. Not A is the negation of the negation, but not A that returns you to A. Okay, not A is A. So that's a negation of the negation that is a return to the old. Now, that wasn't what Hegel had in mind when he was talking about negation of the negation. And actually, in his mathematical manuscripts, Marx is trying to understand the derivative calculus, differential calculus. He's trying to understand the derivative, and he thinks of it as a negation of the negation. You posit a change in variable x, and along with that, you get a change in variable y. Okay, so that's a negation of where x was and y was, and then you negate the negation. That's what he thinks was going on with the English guy who ate the eels, Newton, and Leibniz. So they introduce this negation, then they remove it. Okay, that's how Marx thought they were really operating, and that's a negation of the negation. And Marx said at this point, the whole difficulty here, as it is in the negation of the negation generally, is understanding how this is different from simply positing a change and then removing it, and leads to real results. Okay, because A, not A, not A doesn't lead to anything new. And so Marx is saying, no, there is something new, with the derivative. And if you've got a revolutionary theory that's actually a revolutionary theory, and it's got negation of the negation, it's got something new. It's not just a return to the old. Okay, so this has to do with Hegel's concept of transcendence, or sublation is the technical term. Okay, it preserves what was there. You've got something and you got its opposite. Okay, so that's a negation. But the negation of the negation is a new ground. Okay, it is no longer the ground of the thing and its negation, but it moves them both into presumably higher level, or thinks about them in a new way. There's a positive, a forward movement, because you don't just have what you had before. The content of what was there is preserved, Hegel says, in the negation of the negation. Okay, but it's transformed. Okay, so it can seem in some sense to be like a return to the old, okay, because the transcendence, the sublation, doesn't just cancel out, eliminate what had come before, but it raises it to a higher level. In terms of revolutionary theory, the best example that I can give is what Marx talks about in chapter 32 of volume 1 of Capital, which is the culmination of the book. This is the historical tendency of capital accumulation. He says there's ongoing concentration of capital and the socialization of the workers, united, trained, organized by the mechanism of capitalist production itself, the socialization of labor, the concentration of capital, becoming compatible with the capitalist shell in which they've been confined. That bursts open, the expropriators are expropriated. Okay, and then he refers to this all as a negation of the negation. He goes back to his discussion of the primary, original, or primitive accumulation of capital. He says the capitalists expropriated individuals' property. They took over farmers, individual, peasants' land. That's the first negation, the negation of individual private property. Okay, but with the growing centralization of capital going into fewer and fewer hands and the dispossession of more and more people, okay, that leads to a social revolution, and the social revolution expropriates these expropriators. And what does Marx say? It restores individual property. Okay, so in that sense, it's a return to the old. Prior to capitalism, you had the private property of individuals working their own land. That gets restored, but there's a forward movement, because Marx says, well, based on the achievements of the capitalist era, this isn't going to be private individual property anymore. Individuals are going to have property, but they're going to organize their production, and they're going to produce and own and control cooperatively. So there'll be cooperative property, but it will belong to the individuals instead of to alien entities called business firms. So yes, there is a sense in which the old is preserved, but it's transformed. And that's like the best I can do with negation in general, because although negation is always the same process, it really is the logic of all transformation of things. A lot depends on the individual circumstances, the individual case. I hope that's somewhat helpful. If not, Jimmy, write in, and or others write in, and maybe we can continue this part of the discussion.
Well, here's a question in the same vein. It says, in a number of EPs, you've discussed the Hegelian roots of Marxist philosophy. Do you believe, like Lenin, that one can't understand Marx without having understood the whole of Hegel? If so, how can a person do all that in one lifetime? And it's signed, wait, I can't see the signature. It's signed, not anti-philosophy, but just wondering. Brendan, we can't hear you. Brendan, we can't hear you. Can the rest of you hear him?
Oh. While we're waiting for the technical difficulties with Brendan to be worked out, let me say a couple of things. Actually, what Lenin wrote is impossible.
Oh, he was muted.
Okay, Brendan, go ahead. Brendan, unmute. Brendan. While we're waiting, I'll just say what it is that Lenin actually wrote. And this is in the same conspectus of Hegel's Science of Logic, interestingly enough. He says, it is impossible to completely understand Marx's Capital without having read and understood the whole of Hegel's Science of Logic. Okay, he didn't mean that you couldn't understand anything. He didn't say completely impossible to understand. He said impossible to completely understand. Big difference. Brendan, are you there? Can you speak so we can hear you? No. Maybe you need to get off and rejoin.
Okay, now
oh, wait,
Yay, there he is.
Yeah,
Okay.
apparently I can't mute myself and then unmute myself. I just have to leave myself unmuted. Well, I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, yeah, I don't think, I guess it depends on like what writing of Marx you're trying to understand. I think if you're trying to read like things in the economic and philosophical manuscripts that are Marx discussing Hegel, that can be very difficult without some kind of background in Hegel or some understanding of Hegel. But I find for myself that reading, for instance, Capital is, from myself, was most productive when I tried to rid myself of any prior conception of what Marx was talking about, including what I had read, about Hegel and such. I think there were times in my life where, in reading Marx, I thought that I needed to understand the intellectual background to certain terms, like philosophically, in order to understand what Marx was doing. But I later realized that that was actually a hindrance to my understanding of Marx. For instance, like in the early chapters in Capital, when he's using terms like universal and general, talking about like the universal equivalent, or using the term abstract to talk about abstract labor. I think I remember times in my life where I was trying to understand those terms that Marx was using in relation to Hegelian uses of the term abstract or universal. And that really created confusion for me. I realized later. And it was a lot. I mean, I think like a book like Capital, Marx was not writing for people to need to understand some philosophical history in order to understand what he's doing there. I think it's much clearer if you just try to understand the book within the context of the book, and not bring some other notion to what the words mean to Capital. I find that very clarifying for myself when especially around terms like universal and abstract, because I think earlier readings I'd done of Capital, I was falling into some of the misconceptions of value form theorists that I'd read, and some of that was around the terms like universal and abstract, and I needed to just rid myself of those preconceptions and just deal with the way Marx was using the terms within Capital by itself. That doesn't mean that there are other things Marx wrote, like the critique of the Hegelian dialectic, that can really benefit from an understanding of Hegel. But I agree with what I think is the sentiment of the person who wrote the message, that it's extremely difficult to get to Marx if you think you have to read and understand all of Hegel first. That's a tall order.
Yeah, I agree with all of what Brendan said. I agree the text should be approached really in and for itself. Look at the text, don't import preconceptions about what the method is, what the structure is. I have warned now for a very long time, one of the main things, if you're trying to seriously read Capital, one of the main things to avoid is reading secondary authors while you're doing that, or recalling what any secondary author has said, because they're easy. That you have difficulty with a passage in Marx, your mind's just going to oh, well, this means what, so-and-so said. And so now it's familiar, now it's easy, your eyes gloss over, you hop from a lily pad to lily pad, you're on the next passage. You never learn Marx that way. I think it's absolutely true what Lenin said. It's impossible to completely understand Capital without understanding the whole of Hegel's Science of Logic. I think there are a lot of other things that make it hard to understand Marx completely. If you don't have a really good grounding in classical political economy, you're going to have a hell of a time understanding, in particular, the first chapter. Okay, if you don't know any monetary theory, you're not going to be able to make heads or tails of chapter 3 on money. So there's a lot of things that one needs to know. So yeah, the real force of Jimmy's question is this infinite regress, and Brendan was alluding to that. Well, I got to read all Hegel, but I'm not going to be able to read and understand Hegel unless I understand Schelling and Fichte and Kant, and really to understand, these people, I got to read Hume, and it all goes back to Descartes, and really all of this goes back to, Aristotle and Plato and Socrates and the a okay, you don't have, it's an infinite regress. I mean, even several lifetimes wouldn't allow you to do what you need to do. And besides, if you were to do all of that, it wouldn't help. You'd be just shot up with so much knowledge. It wouldn't help you in a particular case of this passage, this term. Here, how do I understand this term? How do I understand this reference? What you got to do is you got to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Okay, you're not going to understand everything. You're not going to have the full armature of what you need to understand something completely, and then just read the passage and okay, now it's all clear. That's never going to happen, no matter how much you read. And again, even if you were to have read everything, that's no guarantee that you can apply it properly to the situation at hand. So you just got to content yourself with, I understand a little bit more. Well, that's good. Okay. And now I understand that a little bit better. That helps me understand this a little bit better. And then you read a little bit more about other stuff. Oh, that illuminates something for me that I thought I understood, and I did, but now I understand it a little better. It's a continuing process. So I would just say, perfection is unattainable. Get off of the idea of understanding something completely. I don't understand anything completely. If I understand it pretty well, I'm extremely happy. There's so much I don't understand. So little by little, you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps.
Okay. We have just 10 minutes more. I think they cut us off or zoomed us. So if you have any questions, put them in now at the bottom of the chat and send them off. But here's one from Jane Michaels. I've recently seen and heard a lot about a new campaign. Quote, are you a communist? Then get organized. Close quote. I believe it's headed by the International Marxist Tendency, which may or may not be a Trotskyist organization. Another one of the organizers of the campaign are the Socialist Revolution. The movement or campaign seems to be getting traction, while also not being obviously Fourth International affiliated or Trotskyist affiliated. In fact, it's very hard to figure out. What are your thoughts on this? Without knowing a huge amount about Trotskyism, aside from the Vanguard Party idea, what are the dangers of this? And this is from Jane Michaels, host.
Jane Michaels was our guest in one of the episodes very recently, within the past few months, talking about breaking out of the Trumpist bubble. It was one of my favorite episodes. I think it was really helpful to a lot of people.
I don't know anything about this campaign other than having just Googled it just this minute. So I can't speak too much about it, but I do find their opening paragraph, maybe we could comment on that. They say, we base ourselves on the ideas and methods of Marxism, organizing the most militant workers and youth, intervening in the class struggle as communists, and attempting to build a force that can lead the working class in the fight to overthrow capitalism. It sounds like they're just doing like a recruitment drive for their organization, and they have some goal of trying to get 1,000 new members in Britain.
Yeah, the International Marxist Tendency is one of the offshoots of what had been known as militant, or it had a name, but the militant tendency in British Trotskyism, definitely mainstream, kind of Cannonite, James Cannon, Orthodox Trotskyist, thinks that the USSR was a degenerated worker state and all of that. Okay, militant, split into various organizations. One of them calls itself International Marxist Tendency. I think that this other group, the Socialist Revolution, is,
Socialist appeal.
no, it's not Socialist Appeal, which is slightly different, but it's the IMT's American organization, or attempt to form an American organization. And they might be getting a lot of play, as Jane indicates, getting traction. A lot of things have gotten a lot of traction over the years. And Raya Dunevskaya, in her first book, Marxism and Freedom, really clarified the whole thing for me, about this whole idea of the solution is organizing, like people take what Joe Hill said when he was martyred: don't mourn, organize. Well, yeah, don't mourn, organize, but it's become don't think, organize. And Dunevskaya said, look, the Second International, German Social Democracy, all the allied organizations elsewhere, okay, prior to World War I, they were organized to the hilt. They had unions, they had women's auxiliaries, they had youth clubs, they had, this and that and the other thing. Organize, organize, organize. They were so organized. And then what happens? World War I. And they all become patriots. Not everybody, but you got all these social democratic socialist members of parliament voting, to lend money for the war effort in country after country, that are fighting each other, and the workers in these countries are being drafted and, sent to kill one another. So the whole thing collapsed. Okay. So what Dunevskaya said, I think that chapter really just, it's a simple thing, but reflect on it. She says, yeah, they had organization up the yin yang, but what they didn't have was the organization of Marxist thought. And I really think that bears repeating. And in the case of this International Marxist Tendency, this is their history. They had tremendous successes. They entered the British Labour Party, and it looked like at one time, Trotskyism could challenge the laborites, the social democrats, for control of this Labor Party. And they were organizing, and they were getting bigger, and guess what? They just got expelled. Tony Blair comes in, and okay, we're going to have a new way of being a member, and all you do is send us money, and the entire basis of militant vanished. And all of these people who just put all their emphasis on organization, they limp year after year from stunning victory to stunning victory. One stunning victory, then they limp to the next one. You had Occupy, tremendous amount of organization all over. Then what happened to it? Or in Greece, you had Syriza. You had a government, and they were challenging the monetary authorities, the international financial institutions, and then the socialist prime minister, whatever, he betrays everybody. Like in the U.S., you had, Brendan was mentioning Socialist Alternative. They elected Shama Sawant to the city council in Seattle. That's a tremendous victory. Oh, okay. And then you had Bernie Sanders, and there was, so they just limp from victory to victory to victory, and nothing stays. Nothing stays from any of this, because it's all, a get rich quick scheme. It's all an attempt to make things move purely by organizing success, without any real forward movement of ideas, without really much of anything else. So I'm not surprised that they're experiencing organizing success. My question is, are they doing anything of lasting value?
Just the slogan itself is telling, that the idea that, are you a communist, then get organized. It sort of takes the whole theoretical thing for granted, and wipes any theoretical distinctions within the left under the carpet. There's just a vague use of the word communism as like a vague type of political identification without any clarity on what that means, despite all the incredible divisions in the left, and then just an appeal to join them and focus on organizing. There's just the opposite of what kind of thing we're trying to do here, where the ideas are the important thing to be developed, and the organizing is about organizing the organization of ideas and building an organization to work on ideas, and not just like Andrew said, doing political organizing for its own sake without any mooring in any development of the idea.
Okay. I'm advised that we don't have to get off at the top of the hour out. So go ahead and send in more questions if you wish to. We have.
I'm going to like maybe I can deal with one or two more questions, but I'm getting old.
Not
I don't want this to continue all day. I think it's been fairly successful, and I think we could think of doing it on a regular or semi-regular or whatever basis, but maybe leave something for another day. I don't want to cut off the discussion. Okay, I'm not trying to cut it off, but I can't do another hour. Certainly.
Yeah, I think we should put a end to it soon. It's a long episode.
Okay, well, it's fine with me, but we have one person who's been here for a while, so let me read his. It's actually two questions, but this is from Seth M. Are you familiar with the term zombie science? Regardless, how does Marxist humanism distinguish its defense of Hegel and Marxist theories from its critique of other old social theories that become attractive within the contemporary left? I guess you could each take one of those and we get through it.
I don't know the significance of the term zombie science. I'm not familiar with it.
I'm not either. Never heard of it. What is it, Seth M? Can you tell us?
I don't know if I understand I don't know if I know the background to the second half of the question either, or at least what the distinguish its defense of Hegel Marxist theories from its critique of other old social theories that become attractive within the contemporary.
Yeah, I mean, let me just say one thing. I mean, MHI has, as far as I know, no position on any theory of Hegel. You can be a good member of the organization and not subscribe to any particular thing that Hegel says. I don't think there's anything that Hegel said, that any of us would endorse uncritically. And even with Marx, I mean, I'm a Marxist humanist, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I am committed to, much less feel the need to defend lock, stock, and barrel everything that Marx said. I think he did a great job, a tremendous amount of the time. But I think to answer your question, Seth, more particularly, it's something one has to deal with a case by case basis. For instance, with the Hegel stuff, I mean, a lot of people say, oh, we're Hegelians, we love Hegel and so forth. But if you look at, let's say, for instance, Raya Dunevskaya's understanding of Hegel and what she takes from Hegel and so forth, it's really different, and in fact, at times the opposite of what other so-called Hegelians are saying. And Chris Arthur, who's a value form theorist, a Hegelian philosopher, in fact said that. He says, I think of it close to a direct quote as I can give, my use of Hegel is the opposite of Dunyaskaya's, I think is what he wrote. So everything kind of depends on the particular case. If you're willing and you got time to come in more specifically, maybe we can deal with one or two cases.
Well, he has come in with this explanation of zombie science. He says, generally, zombie science revives absolute theories in the present. Obsolete theories in the present that have been refuted or rejected within the scientific community.
Yeah, that's kind of complicated, but I mean, Marx, I think the way to understand Marx, at least in relationship to developments in like, say, economic science after Marx, is just that people after Marx were asking a different set of questions, and the whole field shifted in a different direction. I think if you're trying to understand the nature of, like, the capitalist mode of production, then dealing with what Marx is, the like framework that Marx sets out is kind of the only game in town for having that discussion for anti-capitalist politics. There just isn't like an alternative, like a cogent, I hate using the word holistic, but all-encompassing theory of the capitalist mode of production that is like internally consistent and allows you to understand the details of capitalism and the project of overthrowing capitalism or overcoming capitalism. There isn't, like, that hasn't been supplanted by any newer theory. It's just that the field of economics asks different questions and is just shifted to a totally different space. There's a lot of claims to have disproven things about Marx, but those aren't really, that's different than I don't think those are like true claims, and those claims aren't actually claims that like economics is doing something better than what Marx did. Really, it's just the basic ground of the theory, the field shifted in a different direction. I think it's very different than like the sort of zombie science that Seth is referring to, where sort of fringe theories that were discredited long ago in the natural sciences emerge in like the modern disinformation space. That would be my way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I'd be interested in knowing the context, because oftentimes science turns back on itself. The idea that the solar system or the whole thing had sun as the center, not the earth. Was a very, very old idea. It got rejected, but then it came back with Copernicus and Galileo and stuff. So it was rejected and it came back, and now of course it's accepted. Or you had the tectonic plate shift theory of what was his name? Wagner? You know who I mean. Anyways, he didn't quite have the theory that would enable him to understand the shifting of the tectonic plates. But basically, this guy said, all of these different continents were originally one continent, and then they broke off. And everybody was like, no, you're nuts. Okay. Well, the scientists got some additional knowledge. They were able to now have a mechanism that allowed this to happen. And now that's like just accepted. So things do reappear. They've been rejected. Sometimes the rejection is just based on prejudice. Sometimes it's based on people did their best with the knowledge they then had. New knowledge came along. So I don't know. I mean, then there's like, pseudoscientists glomming onto old discredited things. That's been going on a long time. In the USSR, for some reason, they seem to have had a penchant for Lysenkoism. This idea that traits could be passed down through something other than genes. Like, so you develop habitual traits, and that could be absorbed by the offspring, somehow. That was totally discredited, but that was there in official or semi-official USSR doctrine. Yeah, Alfred Wegener. Yeah, I get him confused with the veggie tray crudité people. Brendan, what's the name of that grocery store?
Oh, yeah. Is it
Wegmans?
Oh, Wegmans. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Because Wegmans is what Dr. Oz called it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm glad we had the zombie science Dr. Oz tie in there, however strange it was. Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to deal with those things in a case by case basis. I think the reappearance of old ideas and their validity. Anyway, should we put a close on this? It's been a good discussion.
Yes, I think we should. I just want to repeat some announcements for 1 minute, but I want to also thank the hosts for their interesting and intelligent answers. Let me remind everybody that this podcast will be available on YouTube. I don't know how quickly, but if you can't wait, you can go and look. Secondly, that there's going to be a brand new episode of Radio Free Humanity. It'll be number 101, and it should be released on Friday, September 29. And then I guess they will try to continue every 2 weeks thereafter. Next, I want to repeat for anyone who missed it, that the class in Grossman's breakdown theory and other crisis theories is going to be September 24 and October 8. 2 weeks and 4 weeks from now, same time, there'll be a Zoom. And you should look at our with Sober Census page, our publication page of our website. There'll be continual information about that. Lastly, before I thank everyone, I urge any listeners who are not on our mailing list, if you didn't get the recent MailChimp mailing, to make sure you get on our mailing list, which you can do by clicking on the contact page of our website. Up at the top, there's a contact page. Put in your name and email, or you can just write to us the way you would write to us about anything. That is, send an email to mhi@Marxist-Humanist-Initiative.org. Finally, I would like to thank Brendan and Andrew, and they would like to thank the people who made this episode happen, especially Aaron Williams, Gabriel Donnelly, and Francisco Palacios. And they also want me to thank the audience for participating and for watching.
And Jaclard.
Oh,
I want to
yes.
thank her as well.
Yes,
She
for sure.
did a lot to make this happen.
Okay.
Thank you all. Thank you
Thank
all.
you. Where's
Yeah.
our music? We were gonna have some music with this, play us off.
Okay. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.